Year 6, Chapter 6 now of Rumblestar. Utterly lay in her bed on the 63rd floor of the castle. She listened to her mother mumbling in her sleep, but no matter how many times she tossed and turned, Utterly couldn't drift off. Was it the excitement of the feast the next day, she wondered? But somehow she didn't think so, because where there should have been excitement, there was a tugging sort of feeling deep inside her belly that made her push back her quilt and sit up. Utterly's whole family shared a bed, and had they lived in the faraway, this might have been considered unfortunate. But in Rumblestar, it was quite the reverse, because this bed was, in fact, a 3-storey bunk bed, and instead of ordinary bunks, there were 3 enormous 4-poster beds carved from silver birch trees and built one on top of the other. Utterly slept in the top bed, which was boxed in by billowing curtains spun from cloud wisp, and her parents slept in the bottom one, which was surrounded by velvet drapes. The middle bunk lay empty, and had done so for 3 years, but even so, every night Utterly paused on the ladder as she came to it, and a longing inside her throbbed. Each of the 4 trunks on Utterly's bed had a gold button with words carved into the wood below. Calm, mostly calm, with the odd bit of giggling, not very calm, expect sustained periods of breathlessness, and hectic, involves bumps and jumps not for the faint-hearted. They were dream choices, and although Utterly had broken with her tradition and selected mostly calm with the odd bit of giggling to get a good night's sleep ahead of the feast, she had felt distinctly uncalm since leaving Casper a few hours ago. She opened the shutters behind her bed to reveal a small circular window. Arlo, who slept inside an old knitted sock on Utterly's pillow and had done every night since he'd shown up at her window 3 years ago, opened one eye, and as Utterly peered out over the moat, the little dragon crawled up her hair and settled himself on the windowsill. The stars were flickering over the kingdom, and the moonlight wrapped the clouds in silver. Utterly thought of her dad and his hot air balloon. A few days ago he had headed out for the mountains to the east of the kingdom, where the magical winds that funnelled down the mixing tower chimneys and nudged the marvels down all the pipes stirred. No marvels grew in the dusky peaks, but by eavesdropping on her parents' talking, Utterly had learnt that her father had been sent there because this was a different sort of mission from ordinary ballooner work. Utterly's dad was among the most skilled ballooners in the kingdom, and he had received a secret order from the Lofty Husks to investigate whether there was anything untoward going on with the magical winds that might taint the marvels when they poured into the mixing tower chimneys. And that was when Utterly had first suspected that perhaps the Lofty Husks were keeping things from the rest of the unmappers. It was no secret that the Lofty Husks were worried. Everyone in the unmapped kingdoms was frightened, because even though Smudge and Bartholomew had stolen Morg's wings, a new phoenix hadn't risen from Everdark, which could only mean one thing: Morg was still alive. And how long would it be before she found her wings and rose up out of Everdark? No one had seen Smudge or Bartholomew since they stole Morg's wings, but everyone knew harpies were greedy, notoriously so, and if Morg had stalled the rising of the next phoenix, it was because she wanted to steal every last scrap of unmapped magic for herself. All the Lofty Husks and unmappers lay in fear of this day. How could they not, when with every year that passed a little more of the unmapped magic dried up? Crackledawn's water pixies were now extinct. Jungle Drop's talking trees had stopped speaking. Silver Crag's glow-in-the-dark igloos hadn't glowed for decades, and here in Rumblestar, the west wing of the castle had ceased its enchantments altogether. The coats of arms no longer told inappropriately scary ghost stories. The wallpaper no longer changed to suit your mood, and the tapestries hanging from the walls no longer led into hidden passageways. Only a phoenix could fully restore all the lost magic, but the unmappers had taken measures to try and protect the kingdoms from further harm, put an end to Morg. It was impossible to cross from one kingdom to another. Only dragons carrying marvels could make such a journey. But the Lofty Husks in Rumblestar, Crackledawn, Jungle Drop and Silver Crag used their magical mirror rings to communicate with one another, and each kingdom had sent their best explorers to try and find Everdark, the enchanted forest in a strange half-land between the unmapped kingdoms and the faraway where every phoenix was rumoured to be born. but every time the boats and balloons returned from their voyages without success. Then there were the protection charms the lofty husks had conjured across the kingdoms to ward off evil, as well as the curfews and updated locks. And earlier this evening, Blustersnap had made an announcement. There was to be a ban on ballooners roaming the skies in Rumblestar with immediate effect, and anyone currently out flying had been sent a message calling them back instantly. Even her dad, apparently. Which struck utterly as odd because they'd only just sent him away, and if she really had captured the criminal who had been meddling with the Marvels, then why were the lofty husks ramping up the precautions? Wasn't it time for a celebration? She had caught one of Morg's spies after all. Her mum hadn't seemed very convinced about the criminal when she told her, but then again her mum hadn't seemed very enthusiastic about anything Utterly had to say since the incident. She was all closed off and quiet now, nothing like she used to be. It felt to Utterly like her mum had given up on her, and even her dad seemed to look at her with sad, remembering eyes. So she had taken it upon herself to cause as much mayhem as possible until either she achieved something incredible that won her back the love and respect of her parents, or she achieved something outrageous that made someone somewhere finally realise that deep, deep inside she was falling apart. Utterly gazed out into the dark, and for a moment she thought of another night, 3 years ago, filled with stars and comet and moonlight. A pain in her chest sharpened and tears burned behind her eyes. Then she glanced at the dungeon tower and a familiar anger boiled inside her, drowning out everything else. "Stupid criminal," she muttered. But as she watched the dark shape huddled against the dungeon grate, she couldn't help feeling that capturing, arresting and handing over the criminal hadn't felt quite as satisfying as she had expected. There had been Frostbite's slightly odd behaviour too. Why had he hidden Caspar away from the other lofty husks? Utterly reached beneath her pillow and drew out the never late note. Busy capturing criminal. There it was, confirmation that she had done the right thing, that she had saved the Marvels from further meddling. So why did she feel so unsure about it all? She folded the note up, but just as she was about to shove it back beneath her pillow, she noticed something. There was writing on both sides of the parchment. She gulped as she realised that she had only seen half of the tree's excuse earlier, and the full thing had very different implications. Busy capturing criminal creatures with Caspar, back in a week or so. Utterly gripped the note with shaking hands. The Neverlate Tree was one of the wisest magical creatures in the kingdom. She had heard the lofty husks talk of it giving messages to unmappers when trouble was lurking, and trouble was most certainly lurking now. The Marvels were in danger, and according to the note, there might even be more than one criminal skulking around the kingdom. Utterly glanced out of the window again. The boy had said that his name was Caspar, so the note implied that the person she had sent to the dungeons was in fact the very person she was meant to be capturing the criminal creatures with. Utterly's skin tingled. A small part of her had wondered all along whether that timetable-clutching scaredy-cat could really be a criminal. But she had so wanted to make her parents proud and to be noticed by the lofty husks for the right reasons for once, because maybe that would somehow undo what had happened. Utterly reached for her dressing gown and bundled Arlo and a spanner into its pocket. Her mum hadn't given quite the reaction Utterly had been hoping for earlier, but then again Utterly hadn't quite captured the right person. So it seemed a journey beyond the castle walls to find the real criminals was the only thing to be done to make her mum and dad proud. But with Caspar? He didn't seem a likely candidate for an adventure at all. Still, Utterly thought, the Neverlate Tree doesn't lie, so perhaps Caspar will be good for something. Like bait for the criminal creatures if things get really rough. She bent down towards her dressing gown pocket. "You know that boy that we thought was the criminal?" Arlo poked his head up and blinked. "Well, I think we should just quickly take another look at him." Arlo covered his face with his wings. Utterly made it a rule never to admit defeat or apologise to anyone, but Arlo knew her inside out, so he could tell when she'd got herself into a pickle, even if Utterly was adamant she hadn't. "I don't blame you entirely, Arlo," Utterly whispered. "I accept that a very small part of all this was my fault too." She paused. But now we've got a bit of sorting out to do in the beyond, I think, so I want your undivided attention." Arlo thrust his snout into Attilie's hair and started chewing. "Good." Attilie crawled over her bed towards the ladder. "Let's go."